like check quickly that. Okay, that looks right. Um, should we start with like your um, like early childhood and
Yeah,
well,
absolutely. Abandoned on the farm when I was 4, left to my own devices.
yeah, and then like it's all a blur until now, basically.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was nothing until NFTs. Yeah.
Um, yeah, let's see. I I was I was just like reading some really fantastic bit of business garbage that was talking about like the best possible way to sort of like give background on yourself, which somehow actually found really like I was like, man, have I been doing this wrong like my whole life? Um, uh, so anyway, that's the thing that's really weighing on my consciousness right now. I'm like, shit, where should I get you to start from? Um, actually, oh, let's start with a simple question, which is just like, well, wait, but how'd you get into Urbit? I've asked you this question. I can't exactly remember the answer because that
Yeah,
actually, in some ways, the answer is relevant if I remember correctly to like what you're working on now, right?
it is. Yeah. I mean, Urbit for me, Urbit was like I was exposed to it more than once, I think, like many people before it like really clicked. I think first saw Urbit like in 2017 from a Hacker News post. Um, and at that point, the website was sufficiently interesting that I spent like an hour that afternoon poking around, but couldn't like it was not legible to me. I just had no idea what was actually going on. Um, but I read very widely. I like to consume sort of like breadth first search into interesting topics. And so when I find something like Urbit that is sort of like interesting enough to spend an hour or two reading about, I tend to come back to them over time.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that
I
makes
think
sense.
when COVID hit, um, I found Urbit again like early 2021 and then finally came back to it in a more serious way like late 2021 after assembly. I had seen the video posted of you and I think Ed talking about some of the landscape work.
Hmm.
And the pitch at that point was much clearer to me. And I had sort of
Hmm.
experienced
But you didn't
at
come
that
to
point,
assembly.
I didn't come to assembly, no.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
came to 2022.
right.
But at that point, I've been exposed to a bunch of just crazy software development practices that I wasn't in 2017.
Yeah,
And the pitch for this thing was much clearer to me.
right.
Um, I had also gotten like more interested in Ethereum and blockchains during that period of time, and realized that Urbit was sort of like a pretty key missing component to that entire ecosystem of just like new coordination mechanisms.
So the thing actually I probably don't know though is, but you don't have a, did you study computer science? Like, do you have a sort of formal technical background? Because you were working in engineering, overlapping engineering roles, right? Like during
Yeah,
that
yeah.
time period.
I worked as a product manager
Right.
at like a normal Web2 e-commerce business, and then I worked in sort of like product and operations at an NFT marketplace.
Yeah.
I studied like symbolic logic and
Yeah.
some mathematics and philosophy in college. Um, so seeing a system like Urbit, well, I would say like more than anything, I've always been interested in systems, and that's sort of like what tickled me about philosophy is thinking about these very abstract, complex systems. Like that was just a fun game.
Hmm.
And Urbit, I think, tickled tickled me in the same way that philosophy did. Um,
Yeah, there's like some cases of that for sure. Like
yeah,
people with philosophy backgrounds getting interested in Urbit because of its like formal characteristics, basically.
yeah,
And yeah, I have like a soft spot for like symbolic logic, and especially like the history, like philosophical history of it, which I
that's
think is
very
super
interesting.
relevant to computer science generally. I always like find it really weird when people are like they're, I mean, I think most good engineers like have no familiarity with like the evolution of and emergence of logic, like as the thing that sort of predates like information theory and then whatever,
Yeah,
like kind of the emergence of the computer.
it
Uh,
was like symbolic logic is interesting because you had the Greeks innovate in a major way, and then kind of nothing
yeah,
until like the 19th and 20th centuries when people like rediscovered that you could do interesting things with it. And then you had three valid three valued logics and fuzzy logics and like just this whole like explosion
Yeah.
around it. It was
Yeah.
really like the first. It was like really the first sort of like portion of the like computing revolution, like starting to think about logic and
Right.
these like information systems. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
It's a cool part of the story.
Yeah, that part, that era fascinating. So you have kind of like Leibniz and Boole and like these really early forerunners, and then like,
Yeah,
but there's this moment where people realize like, oh, this can be mechanized. Um,
that's right.
so like difference engine, like these like mechanical computers, and then obviously the kind of just pure abstractions of like the Turing machine, information theory, these like major intellectual breakthroughs, which are kind of related to the realization that like, oh no, you can think about this as like a thing that has throughput, like that work that does things,
That's
which
right.
is like a major like intellectual leap. Uh, we could probably spend a couple hours just talking about that. But so it seems like COVID maybe was like was there a lot going on for you like professionally during that period? Was it like COVID that was also the moment where you're kind of like, all right, I'm trying to take in like the possibilities of what, kind of like what's out there?
It was like a very traumatic time for me actually.
Oh, okay.
Like I had, yeah, like I had, so I had left my job in November of 2020, I guess.
Yeah.
And my friend and I, who were he was the engineering manager that I was working with. We were going to start a
Okay.
company. We were going to start a company sort of like related to like we were uh, we were working for a company that was buying and selling used cars, and we had some ideas around like doing financing, like online financing for cars that no one else was doing at that point. And so we were like we had applied to YC, we had like started to go through the interview process, and then COVID hit, and the entire market for cars like literally disappeared overnight.
Hmm.
Uh, and we couldn't leave our apartment. My girlfriend and I were in like a small studio apartment in San Francisco. Felt like sort of my whole like network had been pulled out from underneath me. Honestly, it was like
Yep.
very traumatic. Um, and so uh, my friend and I eventually just like decided to not work on this thing. He went and worked at Stripe or something, and then my girlfriend and I started traveling for rock climbing with a few friends. So we
Okay.
did that for like a year and a half. And during this period of time, I was just like, man, Web 2 software sucks. Like working at these companies sucks. The technology is not particularly interesting anymore. You quickly sort of like get to a point where you're just optimizing small incremental changes on a product, and
Yep.
that didn't feel like a particularly meaningful use of a life. And then at the
Yeah.
same time, I was like seeing seeing these massive failures of coordination on sort of like a society level through COVID,
Yeah.
and felt like very like shaken by this actually.
Huh.
And that was like the background context of when I got more interested in blockchains as mechanisms for coordination, and when I discovered Urbit and saw sort of the way that this community was talking about similar kinds of coordination failures within technology, and I was like, well, this feels like just sort of a general problem that we're facing, and maybe it's useful not just in these technology products, but sort of yeah, more broadly than that.
It's interesting to frame. Um, I think that's a nice framing of COVID, and it kind of touches on something that I feel like there was like intuitively, I mean, yeah, COVID was traumatic. I'm like, was COVID traumatic? Sorry, like for me, right? Like, I mean, obviously, I'm
Yeah,
not, but it's fair. It's like a fair assessment, actually. I don't know if I would put it that way myself, but I'm like, it's true that it really was, but I like the framing of it as a coordination failure primarily, and then it also just hits on this intuition that like there's something about COVID that actually like really changed people's perception of Urbit. Like that was like very
yeah,
palpable to me. It was like the kinds of conversations I had with people about the importance of Urbit really changed during COVID, and my perception. was that, like many things for me, it's like something that I could sense, but I couldn't really exactly explain it at first. And my initial explanation was that it was because we, like beforehand, we lived in this world where people were like, there's the real world, and then there's like for most people, like sort of ordinary people, whatever,
Yeah.
very bad stereotype, but like, or in, kind of imprecise stereotype, but whatever. There's like the real world, and then there's like the internet, which is like kind of this fake like nerd thing. Even though everyone lives on the internet, in whatever 2019, the internet is obviously the world, but people still didn't, in a way, take it seriously. They didn't really feel like it was the world. And then in
Yeah.
COVID, all of a sudden, when you're like, your world is the internet, all of a sudden, right? Yeah, you're locked in your studio apartment, your relationship to everybody, your family, your closest friends, the people you work with, everything is mediated over the internet. And so my sense was that that was like a big shift in people's perception of like the importance of the pipes in a way or whatever, right? It's like how we're connected.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
but you're also right that, yeah, like a lot of the, I mean, yeah, COVID was, I mean, no matter, I think everyone agrees that it was a disaster, no matter, I mean, irrelevant. Obviously, it's a, like, you can think that COVID was fake, and you then, of course, you think it's a disaster for certain reasons. You can think that COVID
Yep.
was, like Ebola, and obviously it was a disaster for other reasons, but that still boils down to, yeah, basically a coordination problem, which I think is, yeah, it's like interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way. Anyway, that makes sense. So wait, so you hadn't really, until COVID, you're like not someone who's like reading the cypherpunk archives or whatever.
I mean, I no, I mean, I
That's
was.
okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm just curious. I'm
I
like, is
always
that
had like
really
a,
like, yeah,
no, I always had like a libertarian sort of bent to the reading that I was doing.
sure.
Like I studied philosophy, and so this was just like a natural path that you
Yeah.
wind up in as a philosophy student. But yeah, that's like again, it's like the idea of how to construct systems, and oh, there's these people thinking about sort of like society level like system constructions using a different tool set than what I'm familiar with. Like you go
Hmm.
read
Hmm.
philosophers, and there's ideas around moral frameworks and ethical systems and how you can construct coordinated human societies based off of these.
Hmm.
And I think it's interesting looking at computation and digital tools as a new like tool set for doing that. And
Yeah.
I
I
saw a
mean,
lot of that in those early writings.
but that's why to me it's so significant that basically like computation emerges out of philosophy. Like I'm like the
That's
thing
right.
that's so fascinating about going back and reading Boole or reading Leibniz is like they aren't thinking about like machines. Like they're not thinking about. I think now we have this very disconnected idea of like a computer is like a, I don't know, like it's a big arm. It's like a complicated armature that is like outside of us. But it's like no,
Yeah.
actually just emerges from people thinking, like reasoning about it
It's
first.
it's pure
Right?
thought stuff. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like pure thought stuff. Yeah.
Um, anyway, that makes sense. What the question I was trying to ask was more like you're not, because beforehand you've been working in Web 2 world, and like during COVID is when you really took seriously the possibility of like working on sort of blockchain stuff or whatever, right? Like sort of
Yeah,
crypto stuff,
that's right.
right? Yeah. Um,
I got to the point where I was just like clearly something is not working like fundamentally about the systems that we're all
yeah.
embedded in. Like there is some like degradation that has occurred in the way that this is functioning. I have a feeling that like there's something about the magnitude of order change and like the information that we're now processing as a society that has something to do with that
Yeah.
that breakdown. Like it's actually just the like volume and the way that we're processing it that's leading to issues. And I saw nothing. I saw nothing in the existing technology industry that felt like there was a clear narrative about why this was happening or how we might change it. There
Yeah.
was sort of nothing emerging from traditional politics or policy circles that felt like it had a reasonable narrative. And so I just like from there went further and further afield until I found, you know,
Yeah.
blockchain coordination mechanisms, Urbit as a coordination mechanism. I think there's other interesting things here, like sort of small web projects like local first
Yeah,
computing
totally.
projects. Like there's categories of other things like that too that I think
Yeah.
I would like lump together in this way.
Yeah, I agree that I also definitely like remember having that same and like in a different, basically like a decade beforehand in a way, right? But it was like the same feeling. I wonder if this is true for you, Phil. I don't think we've ever really talked about this, but like I had the same feeling of like, man, like even in, whatever, like 2008, 2009, like computers are going to determine everything about the world, and like no one talks about that fact. Like that's not a thread of ongoing conversation. You kind of have it, like it's become more of a thing, kind of, but it's so like encapsulated. It's like 10 weird ways that computers are making you crazy. Like number eight will surprise you. Like, and don't forget to read the next one.
Yeah,
Meaning like that it's still like within the medium very much. Do you know what I mean? It's like not actually like trying to step outside of like computers as they are used and truly dig into what is fucked about it. Um, and that I was just always like struck by like I'm like how is it that this is not a thing that is more a part of the public consciousness? Like it's not something people really seriously dig into. But yeah, I don't know, Phil, was that even like we've never really. I think you come at this
Yeah,
from like a totally different perspective, almost more technically.
yeah. I think uh, there, there's a view of computing as actually there's like a really long history of seeing computer science as being either a branch of math or a branch of engineering. Um, and while my background is heavier on math, I'm very much am of the school of computer science as a branch of engineering. Um, and so I don't think of it as thought stuff as more of as something uh, that you create in the way that you would create um, like any kind of, I guess, physical system like a factory or something like that. Obviously, there's truth to like to looking at it from any of those perspectives. In terms of computing as being on some level the most not the most important things in your lives, but the thing that drives the most significant changes in people's lives for the past while. That was clear to me in like kind of 2018 when there was a moment there where I was thinking of basically, okay, what are the ways that society changes, what aims toward what can I do to have the biggest impact on society. And you start looking at things really broadly. You'd be like, oh, well, okay, what things have the most power in society, right? You'd be like, oh, well, maybe finance, maybe politics, maybe some of these other things. Um, and they do have a lot of power in society, but they don't drive change in society. The only thing, not the only thing, but all the rest of them around is zero, just about compared to the amount that technology drives change in society uh, for in a lot of ways the last several hundred years, but especially the last 50 years or so, um, where everything, like all of the ways that those other things change, most of that is driven by changes in technology. And so, if you want to have an impact on anything, if you want to work on what's changing the world, you should be working in technology, you should be working on computers, and finding what's at the vanguard of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was like, I mean, yeah, that's very well said. I mean, and that like, yeah, it's such a like, I think the, um, and maybe anyway, I mean, and if you really take that question seriously, then many of those people end up on the network. It's like one way to think
yeah.
about it. I mean,
No, I
obviously, there's
think
like a
I
lot of things you can work on related to computers and technology, but I think when it comes to kind of like if you're interested in the way that computers have a sort of everyday impact on our lives, it's basically like anything that is networked. And so if you're interested in basically the impact of networked computing, which is I would argue like the most impactful thing on the way that we think And certainly over the course of something like COVID, how we perceive the world, how we perceive ourselves, like it shapes our consciousness with in such a just incredibly intense and sort of profound way. And yet most people don't like it's like not a yeah, I mean, on the one hand, what I was getting at earlier, right, is like it's not a part of the that fact is not really part of the public conversation. I think people feel very helpless about it when you dig into this with them. And then, but then even within technology, right? So like even within the
Yeah.
world of technology, it's like a fringe, it's almost like a fringe belief to think like, no, look, like this isn't really necessarily working, but like in a structural way, like not like, oh, like you can, everyone complains about Twitter like being deplatformed, whatever the fuck. I mean, sure, that's true. But like to really dig in on that, I mean, Urbit or no Urbit, it's like very rare, which is surprising.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I like the framing of technology sort of writ more generally. Um, like technology itself is sort of it's a complex adaptive system, just like organic agents are. Like it's a recursively built system where you have more basic components that capture like some phenomena about the world, like oh, you rub these two things together and they get hot, and now you have some tool. Like there's some set of natural phenomena that technology captures, and then the construction of these things has composed on these like more primitive building blocks. And I think it's interesting to think about this process that has played out with physical technology, but is now like playing out with digital technology as well. It's like what kind of substrate do you have to build on? And the substrate that we have for digital tools, which are our most general and our most powerful, especially when they're networked together and individual people have access to them, is like Linux does not look like DNA. Like Linux is a platform for development of complex technology ecosystems, is like not a stable, well-crafted thing. And I think that was the part about Urbit and Knock in particular that stuck out to me, was like we have this very narrow waist of a protocol that can act as sort of a building block for like much more complex tools to be built on top of it. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't
I
know.
mean,
I think
yeah,
there's a lot of interesting overlaps between sort of like extended evolutionary synthesis and the way that technology, in particular like software development,
right. Yeah, I
evolves.
agree. Yeah, like, I don't like. There's a part of me that actually really doesn't like. I was talking about this earlier, where like I don't know if I ever really wanted to be like the Urbit guy, because to me, like Urbit has to succeed. Like, because pitching Urbit is weird to me. Like, yeah, Urbit's great, but like Urbit has to just like be great. You know, like if the, like
Mm,
it just is good. Like if it's good, it works. Because that's how really great technology writ large. It's like, dude, was someone like pitching the wheel? You know what I mean? Like, don't have to pitch the wheel. It's like it works. You know, like you just don't pitch it. It just fucking works. Uh, and and so my assessment of Urbit, because obviously like I found Urbit, you know, as a prototype, but still like as a design, I was like, this is a good design. Like I just think it's a good design. I think other people will think it's a good design too. Like it just has these like kind of inherent properties that you would think of as being, yeah, kind of it learns from the past. It tries to simplify things that are like in an elegant fashion, and then provide for lots of open-ended new possibilities. Done. Like, is
yeah,
it, can you argue, like, when people get like, why knock is bad? I'm like, I mean, yeah, I'm just like, I don't care. Like, I don't know. Does it
yeah,
work? Like, can you do stuff with it? Does it look nice? Is it easy to reason about? Like that, I don't know, like the criteria for its success have more to do with like its properties as an object than like its performance, I guess. Because its performance is going to be, needs to be measured over like a time scale that's like very hard to reason about. I think people are generally really bad at this. It's like, you know, it's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind is like that. What's the like top comment on the original Dropbox HN post or whatever, right? It's like this is never going to work. Like everyone has rsync. It's a different kind of a bad example, but just like I just think people are really bad at actually reasoning through like what the future is going to look like. And my criteria for that has more
mhm,
to do with I'm a designer, but so I think about it in terms of like well, what are its inherent properties? Like, can we think about it sort of formally? Um, we're pretty far. This is pretty fun, but like, let's talk about what you're actually building.
Okay.
I thought that would be like a direct thrill. I'd be like, usually it's like, what'd you work on before, and how'd you get here, and then what are you doing next? But
I feel like these
uh,
conversations are never direct though. I feel like we're keeping with the
yeah, probably true.
historical
Well,
flavor of these
you,
talks.
yeah, that's, I mean, yeah, I guess usually my goal is to just to get to know the person and give people actually, maybe as a post-COVID thing, right? Like, we used to have Urbit meetups, and like Urbit meetups are special because you get these, like, because the interesting people show up. And then we couldn't do Urbit meetups, and everybody moved all over the place. So I felt like, well, what's a way you can get the feeling of an Urbit meetup, out into the world over the internet? So that's an
Yeah.
Urbit meetup is a meandering, open-ended conversation. Uh,
Yeah.
but I mean, in this case, I think what you guys are doing is interesting, and I'm like, think it'd be great to cover it because I want other people to understand it.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so I guess I have an agenda, unlike many of these prior conversations, basically.
Well,
uh,
yeah. Let me talk about Vaporware a little bit.
yeah,
So I've been struggling to describe what Vaporware is trying to do, especially in pitches, but more generally, even just like talking to people on the network. And the thing
yeah,
that I've been saying more recently is that Vaporware is a computer distribution company, like HP or Apple or something. And we're a strange computer distribution company in that the only computer we think is worth distributing is Urbit. And the challenge that we have is that uh, Urbit can't compete in most categories of devices today. It's just too slow to compete. The one area that I've been able to identify and that the team has been able to identify where Urbit as a computing device can outcompete is in this area of like Web3 data storage and sort of like dApp construction. Um, and that is because, like, in particular, there's an area with NFTs where because storing data on an L1, even on rollups, is like quite expensive. Anyone that's doing like trying to do something with an NFT uses a sidecar system for data storage. And so the NFT is effectively just a pointer to some other like file path on a system elsewhere. And right now, what people are using are systems like IPFS, Arweave, so sort of these decentralized blockchain-based systems. IPFS is not blockchain directly, but they have Filecoin. And the idea is that you like offload your data storage to these fuzzy systems that have some incentive mechanisms built in such that they will store and then retrieve your data for you when you want. The issue is that these things actually don't work very well. Like if you look at file retrievability for IPFS, it's like a 50-50 shot whether you're ever going to get your data back out. They're static file storage systems, so like you can't actually do compute with them either. That's like part of the reason why NFTs today are like blog posts or JPEGs or like videos. That's the only thing that these like decentralized networks have available to them. And the other issue is like you have to run a Linux server somewhere, which means that they're all re-centralized under these big like hosting like these big like pinning providers. And the marketplaces that are minting NFTs for the most part are paying these people. So as an artist, as a creator, what you're actually doing is you're like paying a fee to a marketplace, and that marketplace is then paying a fee to Pinata or Infura, who is then storing the data for you by running an IPFS client on their Linux server. And this entire thing is opaque to end users. But what it means is you get like link rot just like you do in the normal web. And so you have these like immutable NFTs where the actual image disappears after a year. And you have artists that want to do like dynamic, like private artwork for a small group of collectors, and they can't because they're stuck with like IPFS, which has effectively like global read permissions for all the files. So Urbit is like still slow, but it's definitely better than that. We can do way more with Urbit than what they can do with those systems. So we're trying to bring Urbit to market as a general computing device in this very narrow market first, which is off-chain data storage for NFTs. And we think this is interesting because there's like effectively a bunch of capital that's looking for new weird experiments in NFTs. You have these global marketplaces, so we don't have a cold start problem around selling the software. We just get to piggyback off of OpenSea and existing minting tools, and we can like offer these projects just an enormous amount of functionality that doesn't exist anywhere else today. What we actually care about is like getting Urbit out into the world. And so for like Urbiters, right, like the pitch is, like we can do token gated desk distribution. We can do token gated like state replication. We want to do like token gated like libraries. And so this is a way of monetizing Urbit applications out into the clear web, making it accessible from the clear web, without having to like convince someone to just buy a plan and a boot in order to start experiencing like anything to do with the system.
This could also be potentially used just as the way as a way to do like to bootstrap an economy of Urbit software generally, right? Like that's kind of how I've always
That's right.
thought about this. And I
That's
think
right.
when we first spoke, actually, the first thing I thought of was like, this is basically DRM for Urbit, but in a potentially more generous, I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily, because like but if I think about it sort of mechanically, and maybe we can, there's sort of two sides that seem like worth exploring, right? One of them is let's understand this sort of mechanically, technically, because there's obviously Urbit doesn't come with something like this out of the box. So you guys are building sort of a new
Yep.
affordance for how you distribute things over Urbit with some NFT gating or basically, yeah, like token gating. So it's interesting to understand what that actually means materially. And then the other side of it is to understand what it means from a user experience standpoint. Like, what does it mean? You know, what does it look like? Like, what's the example of it? But maybe let's talk about it technically first so that because I want to actually, there are still ways in which I don't understand it as well as I could. And Philip could maybe be the right person to kind of lead that even, because I'm going to maybe ask questions with the bias of thinking that I understand it. So like, is this the part, Phil, that you feel like have you already like worked through this at all? Like technically, like, do you feel like you understand what these guys are up to in that sense?
Some aspects of it, I don't know the discussions we've had in the past. I don't know if they're about a specific part of what they're doing or if that is what they're doing, because it's big enough that it could be an entire company's project, but also I kind of feel like get the sense there might be more.
Yeah, I mean, so part of what we're doing, like this token gating portion, there's this concept of like regional consensus that has not been particularly well defined yet. You have on one extreme pure global consensus chains that have nice security properties but are very expensive to interact with. On the other side, you have like your single machine, and like you want to maintain, like it's nice having a strictly ordered set of events for your individual machine for a bunch of reasons, which is why Urbit is cool. But then there's a wide spectrum in between these things where you want to be able to pull in flexibly some level of global consensus, even if it's within like global consensus just to the community of people that care about this like thing that you're doing together, and sort of like be able to pick and choose along that security and trust spectrum. And like this is the issue with dApps today, and like it's very clear in NFT gaming where you want to have these sort of performance systems that have some idea of shared consensus around who owns what, like what moves can or cannot be made, but you don't want to incur the full cost of running that on like Ethereum. Like you just don't actually need the security costs of a chain like that. So I think that this is sort of like where Urbit is going to be most valuable in Web3 in the short term. And what we need to do to get there is we need to get Web3 users and Web3 use cases onboarded onto Urbit such that people start thinking through these like more narrow use cases of consensus. And one of the things that Phil and I had talked about was sort of the naive rollup that Urbit uses for its own namespace. as sort of a rough approximation of what this could look like for other applications. So you could imagine doing something like the naive roll up on a sort of like application basis. And that's not something that exists anywhere else. Like Cosmos is kind of like this. Like there's some rough approximations to it, but I think that is like the killer use case for Urbit with respect to these NFT communities. And so part of what we're doing is this token gating mechanism. Like this is how we're going to get these people onto Urbit. But then I think that the thing that is going to make them realize the potential here is when we can start to introduce some more of these like specific mechanics around it. And so that could be doing like swaps of items on Urbit and using a chain as sort of the data availability layer. That could be pulling in like identity properties that are represented by tokens or combinations of tokens, and providing access to different kinds of software or chat rooms or experiences on the network. So yeah, like Urbit is this very flexible system for doing these kinds of things, and there's nothing else like it right now.
Agree with that. Let's drill. Let me make sure I understand the sort of token gating side. So let's say I want to, and maybe we can actually connect the user experience to the technology here, which is the thing that has been, and actually maybe that some of the stuff you guys is like what you're working on. So in theory, I understand the idea that obviously we already do this, right? I buy a planet on Ethereum, and Urbit has a bunch of VMs running that are watching Ethereum, reflecting the state of Azimuth, this registry of all those planets back into Urbit, such that when I feed the relevant key into Urbit that I have registered on Ethereum, I'm glossing over some specifics there, but whatever. Urbit, like knows about the fact that I own this NFT. So obviously, like there is a bridge there, and you're saying you could do this arbitrarily. I could have an NFT on Ethereum, which basically specifies some public key that the user has, and if the user has that public key, then your Urbit should grant you access to some piece of software, some feature, whatever, right?
Yep.
So this is the thing that I wonder about, which is, but in order for me to be granted that thing, I have to be running Vaporware, right?
Yes. Like right now, this is built into the individual desks that we're distributing. So each desk that is being distributed in this way is running sort of that portion of it. Right. We're interested in how to abstract that out into its own agent that can just sort of like coordinate all of it. But yeah.
Yeah, so this is why I call it DRM, right? Because it's sort of like it's this little thing that's running as a part of my software that's just saying that's man in the middling me in the productive sense, right? It's basically saying, no, before I run the software, I'm confirming this, and I will not run it without, right?
Right. I mean, in the case of a desk, it's literally whether or not the distributor is going to send you the desk or not. Like that is sort of the computation that is gated on the token.
Yeah.
Once you have it, like unless they're doing updates or something, like the user has it now. Like it's still all open source software.
Yeah.
There's no sort of like DRM mechanic.
Yeah. You're not like doing weird things to the bytecode yet, although you could or you could be distributing knock bytecode. You could be doing interesting things to obfuscate what that bytecode is or whatever.
Our stance is that is a very bad thing to be doing to Urbit.
I expect that to happen for what it's worth. That's going to happen. But right now, it might not be a good idea. Yeah.
I mean, our thesis, like part of our core thesis around why this is interesting is because you can combine this token mechanism with sort of the open source development model, and you can let people sort of fork and update and extend applications in ways that may not have been conceived of by the original developer, but you can maintain a link between that like forked version and the monetized version that was released and automatically do royalty payments out to them. So imagine like you import a library to build some new app. Maybe it's like a relational database. Like you import a relational database, and when a user comes to buy that software that is being distributed by this application developer. The application developer has put some price on their app, and if the user both needs to buy that app, that new code, and the relational database, then that should be a bundled transaction, and the database dev should get a payment there. So like this is the way, like I think the power that Urbit has is as this like open source composability machine, where if you download a piece of software, you can inspect it and change it and release it. And this is a way, like what we hope this is a way of monetizing open source software without losing the sort of like permissionless like extension capability that comes with that.
That
Right.
makes sense.
So it's more of an accounting mechanism, a way to publicly say like, oh yeah, here you can see, when you purchase this, also this money went to those, to like royalties to those other projects, and it's a way to keep track of it more than a way to enforce it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean the enforcing, you can also do enforcement, but I think that's like, those are two different use cases. And the thing that I think is more general and more interesting is like this accounting principle of like how can you support sort of like free open source software development while still providing a financial incentive to the developers whose like project is going to be forked and merged in a bunch of other shit.
I mean, that like makes, I mean, the big part of like watching people start to experiment with building software on Urbit has been so much fun, but also is like the thing that makes me feel, every time Urbit matures, it makes me feel behind about something. And the thing that I feel behind about in this case is basically like the economics of that software development, right? So it's like, okay, cool. Like you can, I mean, I love that people want to experiment with this. I think we have there's still so much to experiment with. The system has many ways in which it can mature. There's plenty to do. But the thing that I can see on the horizon is like, look, you're going to need to make money doing this, and we want people to make money doing this. And the machinery it's really important. It's also important as a mechanism for encouraging the ecosystem to continue to mature, basically.
Like I think it's a critical question actually, is we are not going to be capitalized in the same way that Web 2 technology companies are, but we are going to want to compete with them on services and products. And like the bet that we're making, the thing that we believe at Vaporware is that open source software development is fundamentally a more competitive like system design for building software products. And the thing that has been missing is a permissionless monetization mechanism on top of it. It's like you've got this ecosystem of software development. People are like, things are mutating, people have different hypotheses about what will be useful, it's branching. And the issue is that there's been no way to assess fitness of these projects in like a very clear way. Like you have this in proprietary software. A company thinks they've designed something better, they release it to the market in a monetized way through the channels that support this, and they get a yes or no. And like that is part of the reason why proprietary software has gotten so good. It's because they have this feedback mechanism. I'm not quite sure like why open source couldn't have done this earlier. I think maybe that was like an alternate path that could have occurred. But I think the combination of open source on Urbit and sort of like permissionless composing of that software and then monetizing of that software via these global blockchains is a way of constructing one of these systems. And like this is the only idea that I've had for like how is a nascent technology platform to outcompete larger, more well-capitalized companies.
Well, from a product standpoint, the way I've always thought about it is like, could I make Slack into a good product? Like Slack's a good product. I mean, but could I make Slack into a product that I want to use in the way that I want to use it? Well, no, for a variety of reasons. A, their API is really, is like very tightly locked down. B, I can't really inspect like, even if like, there just aren't meaningful ways for me to build on top of it, basically, is like I guess it's just like the crux of it, right? And part of that is just the way that the API is presently structured, and part of it is the way that like the company is structured, the software is distributed. So you can imagine an alternative world where you have tools that are very freely extensible with very like complete and rich APIs in which you can build on top of them, which is obviously the world that, Urbit or Landscape or what, like the world of software on top of Urbit should be. And in that world, then I can very much tailor Slack to my liking by either kind of adding composing modules onto it, building some of those modules, building alternative interfaces for it, whatever. Like from a user experience product perspective, I think that's like, yeah, you're kind of like, you are trying to get to, can I have the product quality at the level that we expect from an Apple or a Microsoft or Google, whoever, which is in some ways, in my view, very much like a UI kit issue. It's like, can you build the UI components and so on such that they are of a high quality? But then can you get the benefits of the culture of open source where I get to pull a bunch of things together really quickly and compose them and do whatever I want with them, right? So like the experience that like your average Node developer has when I'm going to use a bunch of different packages for a bunch of different things and just go nuts. It's like that's what you want to be able to deliver actually to an ordinary, maybe a power user, maybe there's a ladder there, but you just want a lot more flexibility and like user experience. But what you're saying is like, well, as a complement to that, what you need is also an economic model that supports this like open source style development of like these component-wise tools, which, yeah, makes sense. The other comparison I always make to that, sort of very hazy vision of like, hey, here's how people will use computers to sort of create their own bespoke experiences of using software. One place where that actually exists is in music tooling. So if you like
Yeah.
look at the world of like Ableton, like, or any DSP in general, right? It's like super composable. It's crazy. Like you can write your own plugins, you can modify the interface, you can you can stack plugins on top of each other. You have like VST, like like synths that then plug into like the whole your whatever your like DAW is. Like it's crazy. Like it's wild. And it's amazing. And interestingly, to your like it's not uncommon to be like, oh, I'll pay $20 for like an echo effect or whatever, and then I'll pay $50 for like a specific. You're just like constantly buying these little small components that you're like pulling together. It's a super small market. I
Yeah.
mean, well, I assume it's a reasonably small market. It doesn't seem like a giant market, but it's not the most mainstream thing in the world, but somewhat similar to what you're talking about. My other question for you though is like, yeah, but what about like all these different attempts to basically monetize like Git? Like, why not just do this on, like, why couldn't you do this in the old world effectively? Or like, there were attempts to do this. I understand there are advantages to Urbit generally, but there were attempts to do this, or I'm familiar with some attempts to do this with basically like Git and for open source generally.
I'm not familiar with that actually.
Oh, well, I mean, Gitcoin's the one that I think of, right? Yeah, Gitcoin is like the main one where that was like the whole idea was to say you can take any repo and just say like, you can effectively payment gate it, I think. And their idea was to like build on top of Git, like basically payment gating.
Well, I mean, I think in that case it's just like
I mean, I mean to blindside you. It could be interesting to look
no,
at. Like, if you're
I
not
mean,
familiar, like
you
I'm not that
you
familiar.
inherit. I mean, it sounds like you just inherit the same problems that we already have with the existing systems. Like, I don't think it's just the fact that like, oh, I can do crypto gated software distribution. It's the kind of system that Urbit is that makes this economic model possible. Like, you actually need a robust system where someone can develop an app, and you know that over time the maintenance burden that you're accruing for a widely used app isn't going to be crazy. Like, we're not in that world yet, but that's like the promise of Kelvin versioning, is that over time, as a developer, I can make something popular and I can release it and people can build things on top of that. And I'm not going to incur the costs that a large tech company incurs to maintain their software. Like, that's the other key piece to this. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Right. So like, yeah, that makes sense. That's it. Actually,
the other way that I think about this, right, is like software, in particular, like social media, are basically like, it's basically fashion now. Like, you have some application that becomes popular, and it burns super bright and then explodes. Yeah. They're like little supernova. And right now, like all that work effectively is burned every time one of these companies becomes defunct.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting about Urbit is that Urbit can be the world's best like small app platform. Like you can
Yeah.
build extremely specialized small apps that use some like basic underlying tooling that just is part of Urbit, a database, like you need things to build these small apps quickly, and we're not there yet. But you use Urbit as a platform target for these small apps.
Yeah.
They like go crazy, people on board, you get some like new primitives that maybe other apps want to use. And when they're not popular anymore, you've retained both the users and the data on the network itself, but you've also hopefully expanded the tool set that is available to other developers to build new apps. And so like that is the other property that is unique to Urbit that I think makes this possible.
Do you hear that?
What's happening there?
It's like an air raid happening outside my house. I think like a jet just flew over. Sorry. Uh, yeah, yeah, I've thought a lot. I mean, I think you can also make it pretty concrete, right? So like in the case of it's interesting to look at like say Be Real, which I don't use but I'm very familiar with. So like super popular social app that is, in my understanding, is very much like struggling to figure out how to become a a VC fundable company, basically. Like became extremely popular extremely quickly, has pretty much plateaued because let's be honest, it's very simple application, doesn't do a lot, and that's going to be a tough. It's just tough to figure out. It in many ways just like makes no sense. Like they shouldn't be a company. It's just a single thing. People could continue
Right.
using it forever. There are all these historical examples of like Vine or Path, Clubhouse, whatever. Like they could just be a thing that just went on forever, and it could have
Like
even made a good amount of money.
Think about the infrastructure behind Be Real. Like, what are the major components of that system that they needed to make to stand that up, that app up?
Yeah.
Like we could go and enumerate those, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was just talking about this yesterday. Yeah, I've been talking about this a bunch. You read Packy's article, right? Like this is also like
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I feel like he does a good job of enumerating the examples and kind of getting into this whole thesis. For everyone else, this is like Packy wrote an article called "Small Apps Something." That
All
protocols. I don't
protocols
remember.
or something like that. Yeah.
It's like kind of a riff on the old. I think the old one was Small Apps Fat Protocols or something, right? I don't remember. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like on the Not Boring blog. But yeah, so yeah, Be Real has to do authentication. They have to do and like user like account management. They have to do basically application logic. They have to be a database for everything that's going on. I mean, their main challenge that we don't rise to is basically just handling all this binary photo and video data. But all of that's ephemeral for the most part. There's some persistent parts of it, but not a lot. But all of those first few parts, I mean, authentication is handled by Urbit. Figuring out the stack to do basically application logic and state storage, like pretty much like that is the system itself in our case. It's just the the actual application logic that you have to turn into an agent of some form, and then
is it a
figure
feed?
out how to do the front end.
I haven't actually used it.
I think no, my wife uses it a little bit. It's basically just like a current. So Be Real for those of you who don't, and no one should go and who cares basically, but it's basically the idea is that it's like you just get a single update from, you can only follow a certain number of people. I think it's like limited. You're supposed to only follow your closest friends, and you just get one update per day. And it's just one photo from your like front, or one photo from your front facing, one from the back, no, front facing, back facing camera. Do you know what I mean? It just takes 2 pictures and it's just kind of state of the world at this one moment. It's a good idea. It's cute, And it reminds you, I think, the whole thing, the game is that it's just like all of a sudden sends you a single notification a day, like it's time to Be Real, and you have 10 minutes to respond to it. So it's like 10 minutes to just send that thing, and then you can only see those 6 or 12 people that you follow. Cute. I like it. I mean, I think it's great.
Yeah, it's a cute idea, but it's like fashion. Like that is like, oh,
totally.
Look at this like new item of fashion. Like the application is composed of like some fundamental backend infrastructure. What I'm saying is that infrastructure is going to be run on a user's own server. And if it's shared across many apps, like you monetize that. When you download BeReal, if you don't have the database that they're using, you also pay for the database. Then you're good. And like the individual like application, like the application logic itself can be treated in a similar way. So this idea of an image being served over some, like once over some period of time and being sort of like ephemeral in whatever way they're doing, like that, like you can put that into a module and combine it into different applications. And the world that I think should exist, right, is like these things are individually monetizable, and when a developer comes along and combines them and adds some their new take on it, then that is monetizable, and like that whole stack of payments should get routed automatically, and that can be done permissionlessly. Like that new developer does not need to go ask the rest of the developers of those modules, can I build this thing?
It's just, I have a price for you using my module. I have bulk pricing. You're going to eat into my, as a YC, as a future YC style Urbit entrepreneur who wants to build just like a single app, like you're really eating into my margins, right? Because now I got to pay for all of this other shit that I used to get off of GitHub. So
no, you ask your user to pay.
I know you're like still eating into my, but it's still, if I was going to sell it for $2, now I got to sell it for $5 because I got to pay for all my other, right?
Right, but you get all that for, like, you get all that code for free. Like someone went and solved all these problems for you, and now you don't have to do it, which means we're like.
But today I'm getting it literally for free because I'm just going on GitHub and taking it. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, I'm not saying I'm saying I agree with you that it's better, but it is definitely decreasing my ability to be a rent seeker or whatever as an application developer.
It is,
right?
yes, it does. Yep.
Well, for some context to everyone watching, we're late because I couldn't figure out how to let Chase screen share, and I would now otherwise be like, let's look at this thing, because it actually, in great sort of spirit of Urbit development, does actually work and is demoable. But I'm too dumb to figure out how to use OBS, so I can't actually have you screen share successfully. Where do people how do people like learn more about this thing? Because actually I have the problem of being like, oh yeah, this Vaporware project is cool and interesting, you should learn about it. And well, maybe you guys have updated the website. For a while the website had nothing on it, which I get. But what's the best way
it still doesn't have much on it. We have a public group, ligbell/Vaporware. You can join us there.
Cool.
We are releasing today one of our first little products that we're calling Mask, which is an agent to let you log into your Urbit via MetaMask. Nice. We're targeting Web3 users, so we think that this is like a pretty significant improvement in sort of like login flow for them. Your Urbit hosts its own MetaMask login page, which is kind of cool. That's like a fun story to tell people. And you can pass in sort of like URL parameters to redirect to any specific app that you want. So the way that we're going to be using this in our products is you come to OpenSea or whatever, buy a token that represents some software experience. You would hit one of these like MetaMask login pages, and then when you log in, you're in the experience that you just purchased. So if it's a game, like you land in it directly. So Urbit starts to feel more like a for that user, it'll feel like, oh, I'm just using this thing that I bought, rather than I'm navigating this like weird like internet computer that lives somewhere. So that is going to be live today. You can download that from Ligbell. We've got some more stuff coming up soon. We have an Urbit game that we're working on. We'll be doing private play tests of that starting next week and releasing releasing probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks after that to more general people. You get to buy it with a token, so it's going to be monetized.
Nice, that's great.
And it's multiplayer. It's a real-time multiplayer strategy game on Urbit, mostly real-time. Real-time is kind of fuzzy. Urbit time.
That's awesome.
But we'll have some more. We'll have some more information about that one soon. But that's coming up pretty quickly now.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited to see. I've actually seen someone sent me. I've seen a screenshot of the game, which looks really. I
Yeah,
don't know what it does, but it looks great. So
yeah.
I'm curious to.
We'll
Yeah, I'm
we'll have
curious
some
to
like
play it.
teaser videos and some explainers of it coming out like relatively shortly here.
Great. You're reminding me. Have you read Hackers? I recommend Hackers to everybody, but you're reminding me
I
specifically of.
haven't.
Okay, well, Hackers is awesome, and people have already heard me recommend it a million times. And not the here. It's like it's an older like Stephen Levy book. He's like written a bunch of these things. So it's
Okay.
not the movie. It's like about the early PC revolution, but there's a whole like incredibly long section on Sierra, the gaming company. Um, and
Interesting.
you're reminding me a little bit of, I've been wondering for a while who will be the Sierra of Urbit. And so anyway, maybe would enjoy the Sierra interlude in
Yeah, I'll check it
Hackers.
out. Yeah, we want Urbit to be fun. Hanfeld Dovned is on our team. He's done Slam and
Yeah,
Board and a whole bunch of like. Um, he always hammers home that like games are a great like motivational tool, and
yeah,
having just like a computing device that you're using be fun and sort of like exploratory in this way is important. So that's part of the
totally
reason
agree.
why we wanted to do a game.
Yeah, I've talked to him a bunch about this, and there's so many interesting things that Urbit, like opportunities that Urbit creates with regards to games. I think and I think the overlap of tokens and game and like actual playable games is yeah, it's so interesting. There's just so much cool territory there. So games where you have like
Yeah,
composable components of, there's a game like one component of the game is just the game world, right? And the game world is like built by one group of people, and then a bunch of different games actually coexist within that same world, and like you can own
yep,
pieces of the world, you can own it. There's just so many weird um yeah, I don't know,
yeah,
like things that have never been explored
yeah.
basically with games, I think.
Unfortunately, the world that we're in right now with these crypto games is like people just want to build Ponzi schemes. They want to charge you money to like roll a die one time or something. Um, so that is not the approach that we're taking. It's uh, like you're gonna buy a game and then it's your game, just like you buy any other game. And if you want to get in there and like screw around with the code and break it and make plugins and extend it in new ways, we hope that people will do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's this this yeah. Crypto in so many ways is like a vehicle for, it's like a superconductor for finance. And I
Yeah,
think for people who are interested in building real things, um, it's a kind of a struggle to figure out how to think about that.
yeah,
So,
yep.
uh, I should probably go, sadly. We could go for a while. This is really fun,
We
and
could.
we covered a lot of territory, though. Phil, do
Yeah.
you have anything else? Do we miss anything? We didn't get too technical. I'm still like kind of curious. I've some, whatever. I'm sort of maybe just want to poke around in the actual
Yeah, I
self-hosted
definitely
tool.
want to try out the login with MetaMask stuff. Have you seen the EOS work that Mark has been working on?
We want to integrate this into a product that we're working on. We think yeah, the MetaMask plus the EOS stuff is like very cool.
Yeah, we've talked about internally being like, another, because his work lets you just show up at someone's ship and get a comment, or you can log in as
Yep.
your own Urbit. And we talked about like, yeah, it'd be nice if you could log in as an Ethereum address or as an Urbit that's not booted or something like that. I just feel like it's very much in
Yeah.
that direction. So
Yeah,
Oh,
like
that's a
we're
good, yeah,
thinking
you
about
could,
that.
sorry, I'm like, you could log in with an unbooted planet. This is the thing I was asking
Yeah.
Mark about, right? Because there's so many
Well,
unbooted
so
planets.
we have
Sorry,
this
go ahead.
problem of like needing to like onboard, like if someone comes to OpenSea and buys one of our tokens and it's an experience, we need to like get them access to the planet, boot the planet if it's not already booted, like get them
Yeah,
logged in. So there's like still quite a bit of complexity there. And like one version of this is we'll onboard you sort of piecewise where you can log into the project page and like experience some of this just with the Urbit ID itself. Like you don't have to go use the planet, but maybe the functionality of the app is not what would be if you actually ran it yourself. So
yeah,
we're thinking about it a lot from like a Web3 onboarding perspective. And I think it's going to be super powerful for that.
yeah,
yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
for sure.
Um, feel like you don't run into that many. I mean, one interesting, like there are things where, yeah, like Urbit could be faster, or it could be more performant in certain ways. Like most of what you're talking about, I'm like, like, yeah, most of what you're talking about, I think is totally doable. Like I even think like seeing Portal and Heat and some of the stuff going on with even just like people playing Go, which I'm behind on.
Yeah.
But like I sort of feel like the sort of basic ability for things to be composed and to I don't know. I think there's like a lot of like there are a million ways in which this can get much better and will get so much better in terms of like user experience and the sort of formalized ways in which these applications interact. But I'm also like, I don't know, you can build a ton of amazing stuff like right now, and it's
It's really
happening
good
pretty
already.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like better than
Yeah.
I think. I think it's more of what I'm like generally surprised by.
We like criminally undersell Urbit all the time. Like people don't realize how cool the system actually is because I
Yeah,
don't know,
but
maybe it's
that's like
just
because of
such
what I was
a
talking about earlier. I think we both, in some ways, Curtis and I both, like set this precedent of just like not selling Urbit. Like I think it was like this thing that it just felt wrong, you know? Like I feel like I can
yeah.
sell landscape, like I can sell TLON, and like I believe in this as a product, like, and I can tell you what the product vision is and why it matters and why I think it will be profitable and be impactful and be whatever. Uh, but there's something about it's like I don't know, it's kind of like selling Linux or like selling the internet or something. I don't know. It's just like, wait, it's just technology, man. I don't know. I
Hmm.
don't know. Yeah,
I think
maybe
I
it's
disagree with that, but that'll have to be a conversation for another time.
yeah. We can try. That can be the subject of the next one.
Yeah.
uh, anyway, thanks for doing this, and yeah, this is great. It's fun to dig in a little bit deeper, and I think yeah, you're pretty easy to find. So if anyone has questions, we'll just I think you're in Twan Local, or we can find you in your own group. Like
Yep.
everybody's on the network. We'll see you there.
Yep. Cool.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Are
Love
you
to
Yeah.
are
see
you gonna
us
do a
out.
slow fade?
Yeah, that's the that's the only transition I've set up in.